Hey guys, it's Isabelle Jacobson with the Berkeley Political Review, and today I'm very excited to be interviewing Vivian Salama. Vivian's perspective comes from years of experience in the field. She's covered U.S. foreign policy and national security issues for nearly 2 decades, reporting from more than 80 countries. She's previously covered the Trump White House and national security for the Wall Street Journal, CNN, NBC News, and now she's a staff writer at The Atlantic, also a frequent moderator and guest on their weekly show, Washington Week. We discussed the shifting landscape in Washington, the war in Iran, of course, as well as the challenges in reporting on war in general, and the crucial role of journalism in rebuilding trust with the public. I want to start off, obviously, on Iran. I think you've been covering Iran's posture leadership for years now. Um, What do you think about their strategy right now? Regime survival, domestic politics. Is it a combination of these or something else altogether, specifically in the context of the current war?
I mean, what we do know is, and information has been pretty hard to come by given the fact that there's been internet blackouts and they're not exactly, you can't take what they say at face value. So, what we know is that a lot of the leadership, the theocratic leadership, and also the military leadership has been assassinated, killed. And so this is something that they've almost planned for this moment. And so they had layer upon layer of succession kind of built in, baked into their system so that the regime would survive any kind of threat or attack, similar to what they're seeing now. And so to a certain extent, it seems to have worked in the sense that, after multiple rounds of assassinations, both mainly by Israel, but also by the U.S. We haven't seen them kind of capitulate or topple as openly, as freely, as quickly as the Trump administration wanted. And so that really shows that they were preparing for this. At the same time, there's a mixture of feelings and the way that the Iranians are seeing both their regime. Some obviously still support the regime. Many people do not. It's why we saw a popular uprising in Iran late last year and early this year, which is partly what triggered a lot of this stuff. Um, but at this point, they're worried their country is being bombarded by Israel and the US. And so it's very difficult for Iranians to know what's happening, to get a full sense of the picture that's happening, and also to kind of feel comfortable with what's happening, given the sense that the only alternative to the repressive regime appears to be very severe bombardment of their country by outside forces. And so it's a really difficult time. It's very hard to access people in Iran. Journalists are not being allowed in. For the most part, one or two have been able to get in, but also just in terms of any kind of internet or telephone communication, it's very limited. So, it's been tough to really get a full picture of what's happening on the ground.
On Washington Week, listen to Washington Week. I love Washington Week. You recently discussed just like the growing opposition in Trump's like his continued attacks on Iran, from his European allies to the MAGA base at home. Like what's behind that fracture inside his domestic coalition and international?
So I don't know when your podcast is going to run, but for anyone who tuned in yesterday, last night, so whatever the date was, April 1st, and saw President Trump deliver his primetime address to the nation about the situation in Iran, that was very much geared to his base because his base has been getting increasingly frustrated with this war, partially because the president promised on the campaign trail that he was not going to embroil the US in foreign wars abroad. The way that the administration spins it is that he promised that he wouldn't do forever wars, but he calls this a detour. That I was, with him last week at the White House, and um, he kept on telling us, the journalists who were in the room, like, this is just a quick detour to Iran. We're
Right,
just doing,
right.
and so that is something that he's been trying to sell, especially to the base, who are now increasingly saying, wait a minute, you told us we weren't going to do this kind of thing, and now we're doing exactly what you promised against. And so that's been a frustration, coupled with the fact that the crisis that's been triggered in the Strait of Hormuz, and due to this Iran conflict, has created an energy crisis, particularly energy prices soaring. Gas prices are very high. I see California, they're really at the highest levels across the country. And so that's something that his base is also very frustrated with, to say, you promised you'd make the economy better for us. And here we are, still talking about inflation, still worried about whether we're going to afford be able to afford gas. Um, and it's not going lightly. Now, there's midterm elections this year where many, many Republicans are on the tickets for competitive races. And there's a real sense that this war is among the many factors that is going to hurt Republicans going into those midterms. And so it obviously will depend on when this war wraps up. President Trump, in his primetime address, said that he was going to wrap it up in just a couple more weeks. So that's, something we're going to have to watch. But unless he can dramatically turn things around politically, he's facing an uphill battle.
Yeah, I watched that speech. It was shocking, frankly. I like he started talking about the Korean War. It was interesting that you think that that was like catered to his base. I was kind of thinking like especially like if I had any family member in the military, or if I was a parent of someone in the military and I heard my president go on TV and speak like that, like very incoherently, like not clear. And I know like to what you're saying, like it's very clear that there's mixed messaging about like the stated goals in Iran, but like at this point, based in the reality and like Donald Trump's personality and the way you've covered him and know him to deal with these things, like what do you think success would look like from like a military and strategic perspective at this point, given how far?
For him, he's thinking about his legacy at this point. And we talk about this constantly as journalists here in DC covering his second term, is that he's got legacy heavy on his mind. And one of the things, like, he looks at Iran and he's like, what did every president really want to do in Iran? They wanted, well, to end the nuclear program for starters. But really, when you dig down deeply into it, what he says has been the goal of every president since basically Ronald Reagan is regime change, because once the Ayatollah kind of took over in 79, since then, Iran has been a malign actor and an adversary to the US. And so what President Trump sees is, what did those guys want to do and fail to do? And that's topple this theocratic regime and install one that is going to be more pro-West, open the country up for investments, and not destabilize the region. And obviously, the president also has the security of Israel very much on his brain, but also now sort of this renewed realization that, oh, our Gulf allies, our Arab Gulf allies, are also really vulnerable because they're getting hit left and right from Iran too. And so that's what he's thinking. And he's not just thinking about that with Iran. He's thinking about that with Venezuela. He's thinking about that with Cuba. His talk about wanting to buy or annex Greenland is like all with regard to this notion that he's got a couple of years left in office and he really wants to make his mark. He wants to establish his legacy so that generations to come are talking about what he was able to accomplish. And the problem is that, the ultimate end goals might have bipartisan support. Toppling the regime in Cuba. Cuba has haunted US presidents of both parties for like 70 years. you're not going to hear a lot of Democrats shedding a tear or see Democrats shedding a tear over the communist regime of Cuba. But do they want the US to launch military action and do something that could further destabilize Cuba or use military resources or bypass Congress and totally make a mockery of the system that is in place, the constitutional system that is in place to approve military action, use of military force slash declare war? And the answer is no, in theory. But we haven't seen Republicans push back on the president a lot with regard to his bypassing of Congress. And that's been sort of the real gaping hole in a lot of this. And so the same goes for Iran, right? That's why the president doesn't like to call it a war. He keeps calling it, although he has several times. But oftentimes he'll say it's a detour or it's a military action. But he won't want to call it a war because then once you start talking about wars, then the question becomes how can you bypass congressional authorization where Congress is the one to declare war, not the president of the United States. And it creates a sticky situation, but one that this administration has chosen not to really bat an eye at. And so that's one of the issues now is, but the ultimately though, Democrats and Republicans probably agree for the most part on Capitol Hill that they don't like this regime in Iran. They would like to see some sort of a change and for Iran to kind of get more in line with its allies in the region, for Iran to maybe be open to Western investments and Western business opportunities, and just for its nuclear threat to go away. That's everyone's wish on Capitol Hill. But bombing the country, to a point that it will just potentially destabilize it further, creating a situation where Iran is able to weaponize the Strait of Hormuz, which was always going to be a factor, and one that they seem to not have prepared for well, and destabilizing the region further, sending energy prices soaring and stock markets going crazy. All of those factors, on top of bypassing Congress, has been the subject of real debate here in Washington. And so it remains to be seen how they're going to kind of extract themselves in a way that is clean and offers some sort of stability in the region. I mean, everyone I talk to here in Washington is worried that, the US goes away and the region is completely destabilized, and that can create a lot of problems.
I feel like there's definitely been a lot of like discourse about how it's not even, it's just the fact that it's Trump is just so unpredictable. It's not, the idea of the regime change itself, or even in Cuba or Venezuela, it's just that nobody wants Trump to be the person to do it because he is so unpredictable. And just in the same note of like what you're talking about with like the narratives that are coming out of the White House, you've said in war reporting that truth is a moving target. And so I was just like wondering, like, how do you balance, like, especially with the Trump administration, like the narratives and misinformation that is coming out from there, and then also trying to like get across the reality of what's happening. And then I guess in terms of Iran, like, what would you say the biggest misconception that Americans have right now about the conflict would be?
Well, I mean, to your first question, it's not about the Iran conflict or the Trump administration. It's about journalism as a profession. It is our job to verify and re-verify everything that we're told. And that is especially true for governments, for any administration of any party. You always want to, raise questions about what they're telling you. Be skeptical. That's the core, one of the core things that journalists need to do is to be skeptical. That's just, I can't even stress to you enough how important it is to be skeptical. And so when they tell us something, we verify with experts, we verify with our sources in the region and other sources in the administration. We have to kind of constantly take into question or take with a grain of salt what we're told until we can verify and triple verify it. Now, obviously, the president of the United States says something, and we have to, consider reporting it. But we also have to be able to fact check it. And that's the importance of what we do is that, you know, and that's the controversy of what we do, where a lot of people, don't think that fact checking um, is like uh, questioning or putting a damper on what the president says. But it's what our job is. We do it with presidents of all administrations. So it's particularly important now, and especially when U.S. service members are being sent to war, and some of them have died, when U.S. taxpayer dollars are being used in a conflict. And the administration has been very limited in some of the information it's sending. I want to highlight something. This is one of the first Middle East wars, certainly in my lifetime, um, but also wars in general, that U.S. service members are being deployed and sent into action where journalists are not allowed to be embedded with them.
Mm.
They're not on the ground. We are not on the ground in Iran, and we are not allowed access to U.S. service members right now who are fighting in this conflict. That is a gaping hole. Journalists were not allowed into Gaza during the conflict between Israel and Hamas, which, it's important to realize that's still, even though there was a ceasefire declared, Gaza is still getting hit pretty frequently. It is important to emphasize that this conflict is different because U.S. service members are involved. In the case of Gaza, that was not the case. And so that's the big difference here. But, the Iraq War, Afghanistan, so many of the other conflicts around the world, even before my, time, like Vietnam, Korea, you had journalists embedded with U.S. forces to be able to tell people what, their sons and daughters are doing out there, but also what your taxpayer dollars are doing out there. And that is not the case this time around. As far as the situation in Iran and where it goes, it's hard to say. They've been pretty badly battered. A lot of their infrastructure has been destroyed. So I think it's going to take them quite some time to be anywhere near a functional country again. And especially if there are questions about who's running the country, that's always a very, very bad situation. And so, economically, militarily, they're going to have to take quite some time to be able to rebuild themselves again. And in what image, we don't know. It's just going to depend on who's running the country, and what understanding is reached with the US. There are currently negotiations that we might know the result of those negotiations by the time this airs, but right now we don't. The US and Iran are trying to find a way to reach an agreement so that Trump doesn't go and decimate their energy infrastructure. There's still a lot of unknowns, and so it's too hard to say. I mean, even just the fact that the US will withdraw from the war and end its military operations in a few weeks, that's an unknown as well.
Mhm. All right, I just want to transition really quick to some broader journalism questions, and then I'll let you go because I know you have important Washington things to do. But like just kind of to go off of what you were just talking about, like the trust in the media is it's such a problem. Like I think that's at the Berkeley Political Review, it's like a big part of like our mission is just to like get like younger people involved and to more educated. But like, how do you think? Like not even just journalists because I don't want to like put the blame on anyone. I think it's a lot of just like the media currency and the sign of the times. So like what can be done to rebuild the trust, especially when like we're covering highly sensitive issues and divisive topics like an election or the war in Iran or the war in Gaza. Like I know that's a really big
Yeah.
open question, but just what's your take?
So first of all, you have to just always be curious and seek information. I mean, you have to be able to talk to as many people as possible. The more people you talk to, the more comprehensive your story is going to be, and the more you'll be able to offer a clearer and fuller picture. If there's a contentious issue, make sure you talk to people on both sides of the argument or on all sides of the arguments if there are multiple sides. Um, to make sure that they chime in and they have a voice in your story. I mean, one of the things that I always hear when I'm on the road with President Trump, especially when he's doing rallies and I talk to people at his rallies, is, the media doesn't talk to us. They just want to talk to liberal voters. And I would tell them, like, I'm here, I'm listening to you, I'm talking to you, like, talk to me. They'd be mad and they don't want to talk to us and they want to fight with us. And I keep on telling them, like, I'm right here, I'm listening to you. Like, be compassionate to people. Don't don't give people a reason to feel that their hostility towards you is well placed. Or I'm going to rephrase that, because sometimes their hostility might be well placed. Maybe they're frustrated. Like, let them express themselves, let them explain themselves. Um, you know, don't make them feel that their hostility toward you is wrong, is what I wanted to say.
Hmm.
That they make sure, like, be the most compassionate, empathetic listener. You're not there to opine, you're not there as an activist, so don't like push back on their opinion with your opinion or anything like that unless it's pure fact. um you're going to be in awkward situations where you're going to be confronted and maybe attacked or criticized because you're a journalist. Listen to people more than anything else. It's like the most important thing. I've gotten people who were so angry, who were screaming at me when an interview started, taking my number and calling me afterwards because they wanted to keep in touch, because you have to come with it as the most disarming presence and tell them, like, I'm here, I'm listening to you, like, hey, I, I hear you, I hear you, I'm listening to you. And it's hard because there's a lot of tension out there right now, and there's a lot of divisiveness, and people are angry. And regardless of what political ideology you adhere to, people are angry. And so we as journalists, like, our primary job is not to pour, gas on that fire. It's to listen and to try to kind of bridge those gaps by helping people understand each other. Um, and so we try to do that. It's not always easy. There is deep distrust in the media right now. People think the media has failed them on all sides. There's all kinds of new media organizations that are popping up left and right, trying to kind of dig into issues that mainstream media typically overlook. I think that's a great public service. Um, you can't have too many journalists ever. Like,
Hmm.
there's a huge world to cover out there. There's so many issues that go overlooked, because especially here in Washington, we tend to focus on the brightest spot. And right now, that the sun is Trump, and DC is revolving around him. So there's so much focus on him, but there's so many things out there that's happening. That need attention and that warrant attention. And so if politics is not your thing, like, find what gets you excited, what issues you're passionate about. And if you want to go into journalism, write about those topics and write about them objectively, and help educate people, but also help inform people.
I feel like that's a really good place to end it. Thank you so
Oh,
much. I really
awesome.
appreciate it. Good luck with everything.
You too. Good luck, Berkeley. Talk to you guys soon.